Welcome to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. I'm Shawn Armstrong. I'm a retired United States Army infantryman, a published author, a martial arts instructor, and an independent political commentator. And today we're going to talk about something that started with lines in the sky and somehow ended up involving Agent Orange, the Vietnam War, Operation Popeye, 9/11, Building 7, the Patriot Act, the World Economic Forum, climate taxes, food control, billionaire elites, and the eventual establishment of a new world order. That's a lot of baggage for one airplane trail to carry. Apparently, commercial aviation has improved its cargo capacity. Here's what happened. A discussion about contrails and so-called chemtrails turned into a much larger argument about government deception. Some people claim that persistent aircraft trails were evidence of weather manipulation or chemical spraying. Others pointed toward Agent Orange and said that because the United States government exposed troops and civilians to dangerous chemicals during the Vietnam War, we should believe claims about chemicals being sprayed today. Operation Popeye was introduced as further evidence. Then the discussion expanded. One person brought up 9/11, another brought up Building 7. Then came the Patriot Act, the erosion of freedom, government control, climate change policy, green energy funding, food supplies, the World Economic Forum, billionaire elites, and the phrase that appears whenever an argument has exceeded the maximum safe load for verifiable facts, they. They are doing it. They want control. They don't care what happens to us. They are manipulating the weather. They are poisoning the food. They are dividing the people. They are creating a new world order. Who are they? Don't be difficult. Apparently, they is a complete organizational chart now. No names, no agencies, no chain of command, no budget, no aircraft identification, no chemical identification, no laboratory results, no contracts, no logistics, no personnel, no documents tying the entire operation together, just they. The most efficient government program in human history run by an unidentified pronoun. Let me establish my position before people start constructing a version of it that is easier to attack. I don't believe government always tell the truth. That would require ignoring history, politics, military operations, intelligence agencies, classified programs, bureaucratic self-protection, and basic human behavior. Governments lie. Agencies sometimes deny things they later admit. Veterans have been ignored, mistreated, and forced to fight for recognition of injuries connected to their service. Those are real issues. I spent 23 years in the United States Army. I don't need a YouTube comment to explain to me that government institutions can fail the people who serve them. I've seen how bureaucracy operates. I can take a simple problem, create 6 offices. It can take a simple problem, create 6 offices, lose the paperwork, deny the paperwork existed, establish a committee to locate the paperwork, and then blame the soldier for using the wrong color ink. Governments are capable of lying. They're also capable of ordinary incompetence. Sometimes those two things work together like they have a government contract. But there's a major difference between healthy skepticism and automatic belief in every accusation made against the government. Healthy skepticism asks questions. Conspiracy thinking announces the answer first and treats every question as evidence of the conspiracy. Healthy skepticism says, show me the program. Show me the documents. Show me the chemical. Show me the chain of custody for the sample. Show me the aircraft. Show me the funding. Show me the people responsible. Conspiracy thinking says, the lack of evidence proves how well they hid it. That creates an argument that can never be tested. Evidence supports it. A lack of evidence supports it. A denial supports it. A correction supports it. A person asking questions becomes a bot, a government agent, a watchdog, a sheep, or somebody who's failed to wake up. That's not an investigation. That's a belief system wearing safety glasses. Today we're going to separate 5 issues that people keep throwing into the same bucket. First, we'll discuss persistent contrails. Seeing a trail remain in the sky is an observation. Claiming the trail contains a deliberate chemical mixture distributed as part of a coordinated program is a conclusion. Those are not the same thing. Second, we'll discuss Agent Orange. Agent Orange was not an internet debate prop. It affected real people. It affected veterans. It affected families. I know that personally. My father's health was damaged by his exposure to Agent Orange. His suffering is not a coupon that anybody can redeem to prove an unrelated claim about aircraft trails decades later. Third, we'll discuss Operation Popeye. A documented weather modification program during the Vietnam War deserves serious discussion. It proves that a specific government program existed in a specific historical context. It does not prove that every aircraft trail today is part of a global chemical operation. Fourth, we'll examine what I call the conspiracy escalator. You begin with a white line in the sky. A few minutes later, you arrive at 9/11, Building 7, the Patriot Act, the World Economic Forum, food control, climate taxes, billionaire elites, and a new world order. Nobody stops to check whether floors are connected. They just keep pressing the button. Finally, we will talk about the burden of proof. One commenter said that everyone is entitled to an opinion. Nobody has to prove anything, and people should do their own due diligence. That would be correct if we were discussing whether pineapple belongs on pizza. That's an opinion. When you claim that an organized group is secretly spraying chemicals over the population, you're making a factual accusation. Factual accusations require evidence. You don't get to make the accusation, refuse to identify the people involved, refuse to provide evidence, and assign homework to everyone who questions you. That's not due diligence. That's abandoning your own argument on somebody else's front porch. The central point today is simple. The fact that a government lied before is a reason to investigate a new claim. It's not proof that the new claim is true. Past misconduct justifies scrutiny. It doesn't eliminate the need for evidence. Historical crimes should make us more careful. They shouldn't make us careless. You can distrust the government and still demand proof from the people accusing it. In fact, you should. Because a person who lies about the government is still lying. A person who exaggerates government misconduct makes it easier for officials to dismiss legitimate criticism. And a person who uses veterans, war crimes, public fear, and historical tragedy to support an accusation they can't prove isn't defending truth. They're spending someone else's suffering to finance their own certainty. Let's get started. This is The Unmaking of the American Citizen by Shawn Armstrong. It's a political and cultural diagnosis of what's happened to the American idea of citizenship over the last century. Shawn Armstrong argues that the country changed regimes without changing its constitution, moving from progressivism to the New Deal order, then to neoliberalism, identity politics, and the Great Awakening. If you want a serious critique with a clear conservative argument behind it, this book gets straight to work. The core argument is simple and brutal. America kept the shell of the Constitution, but changed the way the regime operates. Instead of equal citizenship, we got expanding bureaucracy, cultural management, and institutions that classify people by identity groups. Shawn Armstrong shows how the promise of fairness and freedom turned into something else. Hollowed out communities, growing despair, and a permanent fight between approved victims and approved villains. The book maps the road clearly. First comes progressivism and the New Deal order, where centralized management becomes normal. Then comes neoliberalism, which uses global markets, free trade, and permanent war to reshape the country and weaken the middle class. Then comes identity politics and the Great Awakening, where equal citizenship gets replaced by a moral hierarchy of victim and oppressor. Shawn Armstrong treats this as a regime story, not random chaos. This book is not just a complaint. It makes a case for conservative renewal. Shawn Armstrong argues for recovering equal citizenship under the law, relearning Republican virtue, reviving Christian and natural law traditions, and building local institutions that can outlast failing national systems. He also tells conservatives to stop apologizing for who they are and to start defending the rights and duties of citizenship without flinching. This book is aimed at readers who feel the ground shifted beneath the country and want more than bumper sticker politics. It's for conservatives, Christians, independents, and anybody else who's tired of being handled like a demographic category. If you want a readable explanation of how we got here and a conservative answer that goes beyond complaining, this book fits. Shawn Armstrong is a retired U.S. Army veteran, lifelong student of history, and prolific author whose work spans military affairs, politics, economics, religion, martial arts, American history, and the unexplained. Drawing on more than 2 decades of military service and a lifetime of study, Armstrong writes with clarity, discipline, and practical judgment. His books form a lasting record of the knowledge he has earned through experience, research, and reflection, created to inform readers, challenge assumptions, and pass something worthwhile to the next generation. If you want to understand how America moved from citizenship to bureaucratic management and identity politics, scan the QR code or use the Amazon link and grab The Unmaking of the American Citizen. This is a serious political book with a clear conservative answer. Shawn Armstrong has put the work on the page. Now you can put it in your hands. Let's begin with the basic claim. Someone looks into the sky and sees an aircraft trail. The trail remains visible. It may spread. It may combine with other trails. The sky may appear hazy later. The observer says, "That's not normal." That statement deserves a response. It doesn't deserve ridicule by itself. People observe changes in weather, aviation patterns, visibility, and environmental conditions. There's nothing unreasonable about noticing something and asking what it is. The problem begins when observation is treated as proof of intent. I saw a persistent trail is an observation. The government is spraying chemicals to manipulate the weather, control the food supply, increase taxes, or depopulate the population is a series of conclusions. Each conclusion requires evidence. You can't place them in a sentence together and claim that proximity has turned them into facts. Words don't establish a supply chain. Aircraft engines produce hot exhaust. That exhaust includes water vapor. At high altitude, the air can be extremely cold. Under the right atmospheric conditions, the water vapor freezes into ice crystals. Those crystals create a visible trail. Depending on temperature, humidity, wind, and surrounding air conditions, the trail may disappear quickly or remain for a longer period. It may spread. It may form haze. Different days create different conditions. That explanation isn't a declaration that governments are innocent of everything. It's an explanation of how contrails form. The atmosphere doesn't need approval from a federal agency before behaving differently from one day to another. People sometimes say, when I was younger, trails disappeared quickly. Now they remain all day. That's a personal observation. It might be sincere, but memory isn't a measuring instrument. Air traffic changes. Routes change. Altitude changes. Weather changes. Humidity changes. The number of flights changes. The aircraft changes. The observer's location changes. Even the amount of time the observer spends watching the sky changes. None of those possibilities prove the absence of a spraying program. They do show why an observation alone can't prove the existence of one. In the discussion, one person described living around the Allegheny Mountains for more than 45 years. He said he had seen trails stretch from horizon to horizon and develop into haze within a few hours. He also described smoke that burned his eyes. I'm not calling him a liar. He may have seen exactly what he described. But what did he see? Was it a contrail? Was it smoke? Was it agricultural activity? Was it an industrial release? Was it wildfire smoke? Was it atmospheric haze? Was it something else? What was collected? Where was it tested? What laboratory handled the sample? What substance was identified? What was the chain of custody? What aircraft produced it? What altitude was the aircraft flying? What route was it following? Was the aircraft military or civilian? Was the trail directly connected to the reported irritation? Those are normal questions. If the questions offend the claim isn't ready for public service. A coordinated chemical spraying operation would require more than an airplane in a cloudy afternoon. It would require chemicals to be produced. The chemicals would need to be purchased. They'd need to be transported. They'd need to be stored. Aircraft would need equipment capable of dispersing them. That equipment would need to be designed, installed, inspected, and maintained. Pilots would need instructions. Ground crews would need procedures. Mechanics would see the systems. Supply personnel would handle the material. Contractors would submit invoices. Government offices would establish budgets. Environmental effects would need to be monitored. The operation would cross jurisdictions. If the claim is global, then multiple countries, airlines, airports, military organizations, maintenance crews, manufacturers, regulators, suppliers, and political administrations would need to cooperate or remain silent. Human beings can't organize a neighborhood association without 6 arguments about parking. But we're expected to believe that a global chemical spraying program has operated for years with no clearly identified operational structure. People answer this by saying the operation is classified. Classification can conceal a program. It doesn't erase the physical requirements of the program. Classified aircraft still require fuel. Classified personnel still get paid. Classified equipment still needs maintenance. Classified chemicals still have mass. They still occupy storage space. They still need transportation. Secrecy complicates discovery. It doesn't repeal logistics. They hid it is not a replacement for identifying what was hidden. Some people respond that governments use private contractors. That changes the names on the invoices. It doesn't eliminate the invoices. Others say everyone involved is compartmentalized. Compartmentalization limits what each participant knows. It doesn't prevent mechanics from seeing equipment or prevent suppliers from knowing what they manufacture. Still others claim commercial pilots may not know what the aircraft is doing. Then who installed the spraying system? Who fills it? Who services it? Who controls it? Where is it located? How does it avoid affecting aircraft weight and balance records? How is the material prevented from contaminating passengers, baggage, cargo, maintenance areas, or airport workers? At some point, a theory must become an operation. Until that happens, we're discussing a story. The word chemtrail also creates confusion because it packages the conclusion inside the name. A trail is observed. The person calls it a chemtrail. Then they say the existence of the chemtrail proves chemicals are being sprayed. The argument has already decided the answer before examining the evidence. Every aircraft exhaust trail contains chemical compounds in the broad scientific sense. Water is a chemical substance. Combustion produces emissions. That doesn't prove a covert spraying program. The question isn't whether aircraft exhaust contains chemicals. The question is whether an organized group is intentionally adding and dispersing a specific substance for a concealed purpose. Name the substance. Name the program. Name the purpose. Name the operators. Name the evidence. This distinction matters because there are legitimate environmental questions involving aviation. Aircraft emissions can be studied. Air quality can be studied. Atmospheric effects can be studied. Weather modification can be discussed. Cloud seeding can be discussed. Pollution can be discussed. Military experimentation can be discussed. None of those subjects require pretending that every white line in the sky is confession written by an aircraft. When every trail becomes evidence of one theory, the theory stops distinguishing between possibilities. It becomes useless. People sometimes believe demanding evidence means defending the government. It doesn't. I'm not standing in front of a government building waving a foam finger and chanting for the bureaucracy. I'm asking the person making the accusation to support the accusation. That standard applies to everyone. If the government says a program is harmless, the government should provide evidence. If a corporation says its emissions are safe, the corporation should provide evidence. If an activist says chemicals are being sprayed over millions of people, the activist should provide evidence. Nobody receives an exemption because they distrust authority. Distrust is not a laboratory result. There's another problem. When people make unsupported claims about aircraft trails, they create an excuse for officials and media organizations to dismiss all concerns about weather modification, pollution, military experimentation, or government secrecy. One ridiculous claim becomes the shield used against 10 serious questions. That's not helpful. If you care about government accountability, you should be the first person demanding precision. You should reject exaggeration. You should separate what's known from what's suspected. You should identify what evidence would change your mind. You should be willing to say, I don't know. Those 4 words won't kill you. They may injure your social media engagement, but you'll recover. The responsible position is this: persistent contrails exist. Atmospheric conditions affect how long they remain. Aircraft emissions and weather modification programs can be examined. Governments have conducted secret programs. None of those statements, separately or together, prove that the trails observed today are part of a coordinated chemical operation. That claim still requires evidence. Bring a sample. Bring a test. Bring the aircraft records. Bring the equipment design. Bring a credible document connecting the activity to the alleged purpose. Bring a person who worked directly on the system and can provide verifiable details. Bring something stronger than, I looked up, felt suspicious, and remembered the government lied. That's the beginning of a question. It's not the end of an investigation. The second topic is Agent Orange. This part requires more seriousness because we're discussing veterans, illness, wartime exposure, and families that live with the consequences. In the discussion, a United States Marine Corps veteran of Vietnam said he had MDS, which he attributed to Agent Orange exposure in 1970. He was angry. He told the other person not to behave like an ignorant farmer and called him a fool. I'm not going to spend this segment correcting the emotional tone of a Vietnam veteran talking about Agent Orange. He earned some room to be angry. That doesn't mean every statement made by every veteran is automatically correct. Military service does not transform a person into a universal scientific authority. But when someone who served in Vietnam says Agent Orange destroyed his health, the response should begin with respect. You don't use his condition as casual transition into a theory about aircraft trails. You don't treat his suffering as debate ammunition. And you certainly don't wave Agent Orange around as though it proves any government accusation made afterward. Another commenter wrote, Agent Orange, conventional farmer, not very different. That's the type of sentence people use when they want the emotional weight of comparison without doing the intellectual work required to support it. Agent Orange was used in war. Conventional farming involves a broad range of agricultural practices, chemicals, doses, safety procedures, applications, regulations, crops, locations, and exposure conditions. You can't place those subjects beside each other and declare that they're essentially the same. Different substances matter. Different concentrations matter. Different exposure routes matter. Different durations matter. Different purposes matter. Different protections matter. Different settings matter. Different consequences matter. If somebody wants to argue that a specific agricultural chemical presents a serious health risk, identify the chemical, identify the dose, identify the exposure, identify the research, identify the harm. That's a serious argument. Agent Orange and farmers are basically the same is not a serious argument. It's historical suffering reduced to a slogan. This subject is personal for me. My father suffered from health problems connected to Agent Orange exposure. He had 7 heart attacks. Cancer contributed to his death. I watched what that history did to him and to our family. I don't need to be educated about the possibility that governments can expose service members to dangerous substances and then fail them afterward. I understand that lesson. I live with that lesson. But that experience doesn't require me to believe every claim involving chemicals, aircraft, or government misconduct. It requires the opposite. It requires me to take evidence seriously. Because when every rumor gets compared to Agent Orange loses its historical meaning. The veterans become supporting characters in somebody else's internet argument. I won't do that to them. Real suffering deserves more than being used as emotional decoration. Agent Orange shows that governments can authorize harmful programs. It shows that military necessity, institutional arrogance, incomplete science, bad judgment, and secrecy can combine with terrible consequences. It shows that veterans may spend years fighting to have their injuries recognized. Those are important lessons. But lessons aren't universal proof. The existence of Agent Orange doesn't prove chemtrails. It doesn't prove that every pesticide is equivalent to a wartime defoliant. It doesn't prove that every government environmental program is designed to injure the population. It doesn't prove that every unexplained illness came from a hidden aircraft operation. It proves what it proves. That sentence shouldn't be controversial. History has boundaries. Facts have boundaries. If you stretch either one far enough, you'll eventually tear it. There's a bad habit in political arguments where somebody presents a real historical crime and uses it as a permanent accusation against every future government action. The government conducted unethical medical experiments. Therefore, every vaccination program is a secret experiment. The government lied about a war. Therefore, every military action is based on a complete fabrication. Intelligence agencies conducted illegal surveillance. Therefore, every technical malfunction proves personal monitoring. The government used Agent Orange. Therefore, every persistent aircraft trail is chemical spraying. The first statement in each example can be true. The second statement still requires evidence. Historical misconduct establishes possibility. It doesn't establish guilt in a new case. Suppose a man has been convicted of theft in the past. Years later, something goes missing in his neighborhood. His history gives investigators a reason to consider him. It doesn't prove he committed the new theft. You still need evidence connecting him to the event. The same principle applies to government institutions. Their history affects credibility. It justifies scrutiny. It may justify suspicion, but suspicion isn't a verdict. A free society can't function if accusation and proof become the same thing. That principle protects citizens from the government. It also protects truth from citizens who enjoy accusing the government. Standards don't become optional because we like the accusation. There's another problem with using veterans as evidence. People sometimes assume that mentioning Agent Orange automatically ends the conversation. They think any request for proof insults veterans. It doesn't. We can respect the Vietnam veteran who reported his illness. We can respect families affected by Agent Orange. We can condemn institutional failures. We can demand proper treatment and recognition. We can do all of that while rejecting a false comparison. Respect doesn't require surrendering judgment. Compassion doesn't require agreeing with every conclusion attached to a tragedy. The commenter who invoked Agent Orange in the chemtrail discussion asked how anyone could defend what the government did intentionally. But nobody needs to defend Agent Orange to reject the chemtrail claim. That's a false choice. You can condemn the use of Agent Orange. You can condemn the treatment of veterans. You can acknowledge Operation Popeye. You can criticize government secrecy. You can oppose abuse of military power. And you can still say, show me the evidence of the current claim. That's not hypocrisy. That's consistency. The strongest criticism of government must be accurate. If the criticism is inaccurate, officials don't have to answer the real issue. They can point at the exaggeration. They can dismiss the entire group. They can say every critic is irrational. Then the people with documented injuries, legitimate records, and valid legal claims have to fight through the nonsense before anyone listens to them. Unsupported conspiracy claims don't strengthen veterans' arguments. They contaminate the discussion. I've met plenty of veterans who distrust the government. Hell, I'm one of them. That distrust doesn't appear because somebody uploaded a video with dramatic music. It came from experience. It came from promises made and forgotten. It came from medical problems. It came from lost records. It came from bureaucratic denial. It came from watching officials speak about sacrifice while somebody else paid the price. That distrust deserves respect. It should also be disciplined. A soldier doesn't fire at every movement in the distance. He identifies the target. He confirms what he can. He acts based on evidence, rules, circumstances, and risk. If you treat every shadow as an enemy, you're not alert. You're dangerous. The same applies to public accusations. Agent Orange should teach us to investigate exposure claims seriously. It should teach us to preserve records. It should teach us to listen to veterans. It should teach us that delayed effects can be difficult to establish. It should teach us that institutions often resist responsibility. It should teach us that science, medicine, policy, and law may take years to catch up with human suffering. Those are strong lessons. We don't need to invent additional lessons. The government's treatment of Agent Orange veterans was serious enough without turning it into proof of every theory posted beneath an online video. Respect the history. Respect the veterans. Respect the evidence. And stop using dead and sick service members as borrowed credibility for claims that still can't identify the substance being sprayed. This is the Second Battle of Ramadi by Shawn Armstrong. It's a focused military history of one of the Iraq War's defining fights. This book looks at Ramadi in context, from the breakdown of order and the rise of AQI influence to the U.S. operations, the Anbar awakening, and the long-term lessons that came out of the fight. If you want the history without the fake polish, this is where you start. The book starts where serious history should start, context. It lays out why Ramadi mattered, how the city became central to the fight, and how the enemy exploited the breakdown of order. Then it walks through the forces involved, the first engagements, the operations, and the tactics that shaped the battle. Very inconvenient for people who prefer history in bumper sticker form. The Second Battle of Ramadi was not just a firefight. It was a fight for a city, a fight over local governance, and a fight that helped change the relationship between American forces and Sunni tribes. The book covers the Anbar awakening, the pressure AQI put on the city, the use of Iraqi forces, and the consequences after the smoke cleared. Human beings, naturally, found a way to make everything more complicated. Readers get the major offensives, the civilian cost, the tactical developments, the order of battle, key figures, and a timeline of events. The book also looks at police training, Iraqi force development, and the long-term legacy of the battle. That matters because history should do work. Otherwise, it's just trivia with uniforms. This book is for military history readers, Iraq war readers, veterans, students, and anyone who wants to understand Ramadi without drowning in academic sludge. It gives the battle context, identifies the players, tracks the operations, and explains why the consequences lasted beyond the fight itself. Civilization briefly becomes tolerable when books actually explain things. Shawn Armstrong is a retired U.S. Army veteran, lifelong student of history, and prolific author whose work spans military affairs, politics, economics, religion, martial arts, American history, and the unexplained. Drawing on more than 2 decades of military service and a lifetime of study, Armstrong writes with clarity, discipline, and practical judgment. His books form a lasting record of the knowledge he has earned through experience, research, and reflection, created to inform readers, challenge assumptions, and pass something worthwhile to the next generation. If you want a clear, serious account of one of the Iraq War's defining battles, scan the QR code or use the Amazon link and pick up The Second Battle of Ramadi. This is military history with context, consequences, and a reason to exist. Shawn Armstrong put the work on the page. Now you can put it in your hands. Now we come to Operation Popeye. This is where the discussion becomes more complicated, because Operation Popeye is not imaginary. It's invoked as an example of the United States government conducting weather modification activity during the Vietnam War. In the discussion, a commenter said the government denied the program for roughly 7 years. Another person used Operation Popeye as evidence that anyone skeptical of chemtrails was in denial about weather manipulation. This is where careful thinking becomes necessary. A documented government weather modification program matters. It deserves to be studied. It deserves to be discussed. It deserves to influence how we evaluate government credibility. But a documented program for one war does not prove every modern accusation involving the weather. What does Operation Popeye establish? It establishes that government officials and military planners considered weather modification useful enough to employ in a tactical environment. It establishes that cloud seeding technology existed. It establishes that weather could be treated as part of military planning. It establishes that a program could be classified or concealed from the general public. Depending on the exact historical record being cited, it may also establish that officials denied or avoided acknowledging the program for a period of time. Those are meaningful facts. They shouldn't be ignored. Now ask the next question. What does Operation Popeye establish about a white trail above Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, Brazil, Canada, or anywhere else today? By itself, nothing. It doesn't identify the aircraft. It doesn't identify the substance. It doesn't identify the agency. It doesn't identify the mission. It doesn't identify the current budget. It doesn't identify the operational authority. It doesn't show continuity between the Vietnam-era program and the current allegation. It proves one program. The modern claim concerns another alleged program. The connection must be demonstrated. People often confuse capability with action. A government has the capability to monitor communications. That doesn't prove every dropped telephone call was government interference. A military has incendiary weapons. That doesn't prove every forest fire was started by the military. A police department owns surveillance equipment. That doesn't prove every camera in town belongs to the police. A country possesses chemical weapons. That doesn't prove every unusual smell is a chemical attack. Capability tells us what could occur. Evidence tells us what did occur. That gap is where most conspiracy arguments build a condominium. Another document mentioned in the discussion was called Forest Fire as a Military Weapon. That title sounds dramatic. Military institutions study destructive possibilities. They study weapons. They study weather. They study terrain. They study infrastructure. They study transportation. They study psychology. They study disease. They study economic pressure. They study what an enemy might do and what their own forces might be capable of doing. The existence of a study doesn't automatically prove the studied method was used in every suspected incident. You still need operational evidence. Was the plan approved? Was it funded? Was it executed? Where? When? By whom? Using what equipment? With what result? A proposal isn't an operation. A study isn't an operation. A capability isn't an operation. A historical operation is not proof of an unrelated current operation. These distinctions aren't government propaganda. They're basic reasoning. This doesn't mean historical programs are irrelevant. Operation Popeye should influence how we respond when officials make broad statements such as, the government has never attempted to influence weather. A documented program would contradict that statement. It would show the statement was false or carelessly worded. But consider a different statement. Persistent commercial aircraft trails don't prove a covert global spraying program. Operation Popeye doesn't contradict that. One statement concerns historical capability and action. The other concerns the evidence needed for a current allegation. Conspiracy arguments often blend those two questions together because the historical examples carries emotional force. The correct way to use Operation Popeye is to ask focused questions. Did later programs grow out of it? What agencies retained weather modification responsibilities? What laws or treaties affected future activity? What research continued? What programs became public? What programs remained classified? What budgets existed? What aircraft and equipment were involved? What specific evidence connects any of those programs to the trails people currently identify as chemtrails? Those questions move the discussion forward. Saying Operation Popeye existed, therefore chemtrails are real, moves nothing forward. It skips the entire investigation and awards itself a medal for arriving. The scale of the allegation also matters. A limited wartime program in a conflict area presents one set of logistical requirements. A worldwide program involving civilian skies, multiple nations, commercial aircraft, military aircraft, climate policy, agriculture, public health, and population control presents another. The larger the claimed program, the more people, equipment, funding, coordination, and documentation would be required. People respond by saying that's why it's compartmentalized. Compartmentalization can't reduce a global operation to 3 men in a basement. Someone still manufactures the material. Someone transports it. Someone installs the equipment. Someone maintains the equipment. Someone monitors the results. Someone writes the orders. Someone authorizes the money. Someone explains the aircraft modifications. Someone handles accidental exposure. Someone deals with leaks, defects, crashes, audits, retirements, political transitions, and changes in contractors. The broader the theory becomes, the greater the evidence requirement becomes. Conspiracy thinking usually does the opposite. The broader the theory becomes, the less specific the evidence becomes. Operation Popeye also raises a larger question about public trust. Government secrecy has consequences. When officials conceal real programs, they create space for false theories. When agencies lie, people remember. When institutions deny harm and later admit it, citizens become suspicious of future denials. That reaction is understandable. The government can't repeatedly damage its credibility and then act offended when the public becomes skeptical. Trust is earned. It can also be destroyed. But citizens have responsibilities too. Once trust is damaged, citizens still have to evaluate each claim separately. Otherwise, government dishonesty becomes an excuse for public dishonesty. The official says, "Trust us because we're the government." The conspiracy promoter says, "Trust me because the government lies." Both are asking you to stop thinking. A serious person refuses both demands. A serious person says, "I will examine the evidence. I will check the source. I will separate the documented program from the alleged program. I will distinguish a historical record from a modern inference. I won't dismiss the accusation merely because it challenges authority. I won't accept the accusation merely because it challenges authority." That's intellectual independence. It's less exciting than announcing you've uncovered a global plot. It's also the advantage of not making you look like you bought your intelligence from a man selling emergency food buckets on late-night radio. Operation Popeye should be taught because it shows the relationship between warfare, technology, secrecy, weather, and government power. It should be discussed because citizens have a right to know what's been done in their name. It should be remembered because governments often define the limits of acceptable conduct after they've already experimented with crossing them. But it shouldn't be abused. Historical knowledge should improve your ability to distinguish between claims. It shouldn't flatten every event into the same accusation. Operation Popeye proves Operation Popeye. Anything beyond that requires additional evidence. That sentence respects history. It respects logic. And it prevents one real government program from becoming a counterfeit certificate of authenticity for every theory that follows. Now let's examine how the argument expanded. One commenter began with Operation Popeye, then he mentioned 9/11, then the Patriot Act, then Building 7, then the erosion of freedom, then the division of the American people, then divide and conquer, then the New World Order. Another commenter began with weather manipulation, then he moved to geoengineering, then the World Economic Forum, then the climate change agenda, then higher taxes, then government funding of green energy, then control of the food supply, then billionaires, then control and money. This is the conspiracy escalator. Each new claim carries the emotional force of the previous claim, but the connection is never established. One subject becomes 5. 5 becomes 10. By the end, disagreement with any part of the argument is treated as denial of the entire history of government misconduct. Let's separate these subjects. The Patriot Act can be criticized. Emergency powers can be abused. Governments can expand authority after a crisis. Political leaders can exploit fear. Media organizations can report incorrect information. The public can be manipulated. Corporations can influence policy. Wealthy individuals can pursue political interests. Climate policies can create economic costs. Green energy programs can waste money. Agricultural policy can affect food prices and production. International organizations can promote ideas that deserve criticism. None of those statements prove that aircraft are secretly spraying chemicals to advance one coordinated plan. They're separate claims. They require separate evidence. The statement, "every incident is followed by freedoms being eroded," contains a legitimate concern. History gives us many examples of emergency powers surviving beyond the emergency. Government agencies rarely return authority like a borrowed lawnmower. Once power enters the garage, somebody in Washington puts an inventory sticker on it. Citizens should watch what laws are passed during a crisis. They should examine surveillance authority. They should examine detention power. They should examine executive action. They should ask whether temporary measures have become permanent. That's responsible civic behavior. But the fact that officials exploit a crisis doesn't prove they created the crisis. Opportunity and authorship are different questions. A politician may use an event to advance a policy. That doesn't establish that the politician caused the event. A corporation may profit from a disaster. That doesn't establish that the corporation created the disaster. A government may expand power after an attack. That doesn't establish that the government organized the attack. To establish orchestration, you need evidence of orchestration. Benefit alone isn't proof. Building 7 is often introduced as though mentioning the name ends the discussion. People say media organizations reported its collapse prematurely. They point to confusion on that day. They ask why the building fell. Questions about reporting, structural failure, emergency response, and official investigations are fair subjects. But a question isn't evidence for every answer somebody prefers. "Something seems wrong to me" is a reason to examine the record. It's not permission to insert an entire theory without support. When people say there are unanswered questions, I often agree. Human events leave unanswered questions. Wars leave unanswered questions. Crimes leave unanswered questions. Accidents leave unanswered questions. Investigations contain errors. Witnesses disagree. Records remain incomplete. The presence of unanswered questions doesn't mean every proposed answer is equally credible. Then we arrive at the New World Order. This phrase has performed more unpaid labor than half the federal workforce. Whenever the theory lacks a named organization, defined policy, identifiable chain of command, or documented objective, the New World Order arrives to provide atmosphere. What does it mean? One global government? Coordinated financial control? Military rule? Corporate rule? International regulation? Cultural change? Immigration? Digital currency? Climate policy? Public health authority? The phrase changes depending on the argument. That flexibility makes it useful for persuasion and useless for investigation. A claim that can mean everything explains nothing. The same problem appears with the word elite. Who specifically? A billionaire? Which billionaire? A government minister? Which government? A corporation? Which corporation? An international organization? Which department? A scientist? Which scientist? A foundation? Which grant? A political party? Which officials? A group of people can share interests without sharing one command structure. Powerful institutions can cooperate on one issue and compete on another. Corporations seek profit. Politicians seek power. Activists seek policy changes. Bureaucracies seek larger budgets and greater authority. Those motives can create harmful results without a single person controlling the entire system. Sometimes society produces bad outcomes because multiple institutions pursue their own interests. There doesn't have to be a secret room containing 12 men, a map of the world, and a fog machine. The World Economic Forum plays the role of an all-purpose villain in many arguments. Someone finds a speech, proposal, slogan, or discussion they dislike. That's fair material for criticism. Criticize the proposal. Quote the statement. Explain the policy. Identify who supports it. Describe what authority they possess. Show how the idea could be implemented. But don't jump from an organization discussed changes in agriculture or energy to aircraft are spraying the population. That connection requires evidence. Public statements don't prove hidden aircraft operations. If the evidence exists, present it. If it doesn't, stop acting as though suspicion performed the same job. Climate policy also deserves direct criticism. You can argue that a climate proposal raises energy costs. You can argue that subsidies benefit politically connected companies. You can argue that regulations place excessive burdens on farmers. You can argue that some activists exaggerate risks. You can argue that politicians use environmental policy to expand government. You can argue about taxes, energy reliability, nuclear power, oil, gas, coal, wind, solar, electric vehicles, or land use. Those are political arguments. They involve public policy. They can be examined through legislation, budgets, prices, regulations, and results. You don't need chemtrails to criticize climate policy. Adding in an unsupported spraying theory makes the policy criticism weaker. Now the politician doesn't have to defend the tax. He can point at the conspiracy claim and dismiss the critic. Congratulations! You volunteered to become the least credible witness against your own position. The claim involving control of the food supply follows the same pattern. Food production is affected by land policy, water policy, fertilizer costs, fuel costs, labor, transportation, weather, trade, disease, regulation, corporate concentration, and consumer demand. Those are real subjects. If a government policy harms farmers, name the policy. If a corporation controls too much of a market, identify the corporation and market share. If a regulation increases costs, show the numbers. If a billionaire funds an agricultural initiative, identify it. Specific criticism can be tested. Everything is about food control, can't. It turns every drought, regulation, investment, crop failure, research program, and airplane trail into part of one plan. Once a theory explains everything, nothing can disprove it. That's the defining feature of the conspiracy escalator. Every event confirms the theory. A government denial confirms the cover-up. A government admission confirms the program. A scientific explanation confirms that scientists are involved. A lack of documents confirms classification. Leaked documents confirm secrecy. Criticism confirms censorship. Mockery confirms fear. Silence confirms complicity. There's no possible result that causes a theory to fail. That may feel emotionally secure, it's intellectually empty. A claim must be capable of being wrong. Otherwise, it's not being tested, it's being protected. People are attracted to total explanations because the world is complicated. Bad events often have multiple causes. Institutions behave inconsistently. Policies have unintended consequences. Individuals make mistakes. Organizations compete. Weather changes. Markets change. Information arrives slowly. Nobody controls all of it. That uncertainty is uncomfortable. A single hidden enemy provides a cleaner story. They planned it feels more satisfying than several institutions made selfish decisions, political leaders exploited the results, corporations protected profits, bureaucrats avoided responsibility, citizens ignored details, and nobody fully controlled the outcome. The second explanation is less dramatic. It's also how human systems often operate. Disorder, greed, incompetence, ambition, and fear can produce enormous damage without a master plan. None of this means coordinated wrongdoing never occurs. Conspiracies exist. People secretly cooperate to commit crimes. Officials conceal actions. Corporations hide information. Political organizations coordinate messaging. The word conspiracy describes a real category of conduct. But real conspiracies are proven through evidence. Messages, meetings, payments, witnesses, orders, records, physical evidence, operational details. A theory doesn't become more credible because a speaker lists 10 historical scandals before presenting it. Past crimes don't form a group discount on proof. The conspiracy escalator also damages political unity. The commenter argued that every incident drives a wedge between Americans. There's truth in that concern. Political media rewards division. Parties use fear. Activists treat disagreement as moral corruption. Citizens increasingly assume that opponents are enemies. But conspiracy theories also drive wedges. They divide people into the awake and the asleep, the informed and the sheep, the independent thinkers and the bots. Once you classify disagreement as proof of obedience, Conversation ends. You no longer need to answer questions. You only need to diagnose the person asking them. That's how political tribalism protects itself. A country doesn't become stronger when half the population blindly trusts institutions and the other half automatically believes every accusation against them. Both groups have surrendered responsibility. One group outsources judgment to authority. The other outsources judgment to suspicion. Citizens should demand better from both. Question the government. Question the media. Question corporations. Question activists. Question online personalities. Question the person telling you that questioning them proves you're controlled. Especially question that person. He's selling certainty without a receipt. Consent of the governed takes a simple but essential question and treats it with a seriousness it deserves. What makes government legitimate, and why does that still matter today? Shawn Armstrong digs into the Federalist Papers and shows why consent is not some dusty slogan. It's the foundation of self-government. At the center of this book is a basic truth. Government is only legitimate when it rests on the consent of the governed. Armstrong walks the readers through that principle with clarity, using the Federalist Papers to show how the founders understood power, authority, and the limits that keep liberty alive. This is a full collection of essays, not a thin overview. Across 452 pages, Armstrong examines the Federalist Papers through the work of Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, dealing with political philosophy, rights, and the balance of power. The point is not to bury you in jargon. The point is to make the ideas usable. What gives this book teeth is that it doesn't stay in the 18th century. Armstrong connects the principles in the Federalist Papers to modern arguments about power, liberty, and the role of the citizen. If you want to understand today without pretending the past is irrelevant, this book gives you a solid footing. This is for readers who actually want substance: scholars, history buffs, political enthusiasts, and regular citizens who are tired of shallow civics and cheap talking points. If you want to think more clearly about government and your place in it, this book gives you real material to work with. Consent of the Governed is written by Shawn Armstrong, whose background brings a grounded voice to a serious subject. He writes with clarity, keeps the argument moving, and never loses sight of the fact that these ideas matter because people still live under governments that either respect consent or abuse power. If you want a stronger grasp of the principle that makes Republican government legitimate, get the book. Scan the QR code and pick up Consent of the Governed on Amazon. Consent of the Governed by Shawn Armstrong. Serious history, clear argument, and relevance that reaches straight into the present day. The fifth topic is the argument itself. One commenter said he wasn't arguing with anyone. He said everyone was entitled to an opinion. He said people who disagreed didn't have to prove anything. He told others to do their own due diligence and believe whatever they wanted. Then he called me a bot and a page watchdog. Let's begin with the first statement. I'm not arguing. You're replying to a disagreement. You're defending a position. You're challenging the people who questioned it. You're insulting one of the participants. That's an argument. It may be a bad argument. It may be an argument trying to escape the building without paying, but it's still an argument. Saying, I'm not arguing, doesn't create diplomatic immunity for the argument that follows. Everyone is entitled to an opinion. That's true. You can believe a movie is terrible. You can believe a song is annoying. You can believe one football team is better than another. You can believe a politician is arrogant. You can believe modern architecture looks like somebody lost a fight with a shipping container. Those are opinions. Now consider these statements. A government agency is secretly spraying chemicals. A specific aircraft released a dangerous substance. An organization is manipulating the weather to increase taxes. Billionaires are poisoning the population to control food. A global operation is altering the climate. Those aren't merely personal preferences. They're factual claims about events, people, organizations, substances, motives, and actions. Factual claims require evidence. Freedom of speech allows you to make a claim. It doesn't require other people to treat the claim as proven. You have the right to say the moon is a federal surveillance balloon. Other people have the right to ask whether you have recently been hit in the head with patio furniture. Rights protect expression. They don't certify accuracy. The burden of proof belongs to the person making the claim. If I say a man robbed a bank, I should provide evidence. I don't get to say, prove he didn't rob it. If I say a corporation poisoned a river, I should identify the corporation, the substance, the release, and the supporting records. I don't get to say, do your own research. If I say aircraft are spraying chemicals as part of a secret program, I should identify the aircraft, chemical, program, operators, purpose, and evidence. I don't get to assign the investigation to everyone else. The person making the accusation carries the burden. That principle protects all of us. Without burden of proof, any accusation becomes valid until disproven. You could accuse anyone of anything. The accused person would have to prove a negative. That's often impossible. Imagine someone says, there's an invisible chemical in your house. You ask how they know. They reply, do your own research. You conduct tests and find nothing. They say, that proves the chemical is designed to avoid detection. You ask what chemical it is. They say, that information is classified. You ask who placed it there. They say, they did. You ask who they are. They say, the fact that you have to ask means you're not awake. That argument can't be defeated because it was designed to avoid contact with evidence. Do your own research can be good advice. People should read. They should check sources. They should compare claims. They should examine documents. But the phrase is often used as an escape hatch. A person makes a dramatic accusation, someone requests evidence, the claimant says, I'm not doing your research for you. That reverses responsibility. Nobody asked you to perform another person's research. They asked you to support your own statement. If you can't support it, say so. Say, I suspect this, but I can't prove it. That's honest. Say, I saw something unusual and I wanted to investigate it. That's reasonable. Say, I have questions about the official explanation. That's fair. Don't say, this is definitely a global operation and anybody who asks for evidence is lazy. That's arrogance dressed as independence. Due diligence also requires more than searching for information that agrees with you. A proper investigation looks for confirmation and contradiction. It asks, what evidence supports the claim? What evidence challenges it? Is the source reporting direct knowledge? Is the source repeating somebody else? Can the claim be independently verified? Does the conclusion follow from the evidence? What alternative explanations exist? What evidence would prove the claim wrong? People who search only for confirmation aren't investigating. They're shopping. The internet will sell you any conclusion you want. It has overnight delivery. The bot accusation deserves attention because it's become common. Someone writes clearly. They ask structured questions. They request evidence. Instead of answering, the other person says, you sound like a bot. What does that prove? Nothing. It's an attempt to avoid the substance of the argument. If a bot asks a valid question, the question remains valid. If a human writes nonsense, the nonsense doesn't improve because it was handcrafted. The identity of the speaker doesn't answer the argument. Quote the error. Identify the false claim. Challenge the reasoning. Provide the missing evidence. Bot isn't a rebuttal. It's what people say when they've reached the end of the information and would like the insult to continue alone. The watchdog accusation works the same way. This was a public comment section. People were discussing claims publicly. Nobody entered a private conversation. Nobody opened someone's mail. Nobody climbed through a kitchen window. If you post a factual accusation in public, people can respond publicly. You don't control which members of the public answer. You don't get to say, I was talking to somebody else. You were writing beneath a public video. That's the digital equivalent of using a bullhorn in a parking lot and becoming offended when someone outside the original group hears you. Calling someone a watchdog is also meant to suggest improper loyalty. The accusation is that the person is defending the channel owner, government, media, or official narrative instead of thinking independently. But independence doesn't mean automatically opposing whatever the government says. If the government says 2 plus 2 equals 4, I don't need to insist it equals 7 to prove I'm free. Independent thinking means judging the claim. Sometimes the official explanation is wrong. Sometimes it's incomplete. Sometimes it's accurate. Sometimes the critic is correct. Sometimes the critic is mistaken. Truth doesn't wear a team jersey. This is where politics has damaged public reasoning. People believe standards are weapons used only against the opposing side. When their side makes a claim, it deserves trust. When the other side makes a claim, it requires proof. When their preferred commentator speculates, he's asking questions. When an opponent speculates, he's spreading misinformation. When their group insults people, it's frustration. When the other group insults people, it's hatred. When their government official uses power, it's necessary. When the opposing official uses the same power, it's tyranny. That's not principle. That's political fandom with worse merchandise. Evidence standards must apply across the board. If Donald Trump makes a claim, ask for evidence. If Joe Biden makes a claim, ask for evidence. If a government scientist makes a claim, ask for evidence. If an environmental activist makes a claim, ask for evidence. If a farmer makes a claim, ask for evidence. If a veteran makes a claim, ask for evidence. If I make a claim, ask me for evidence. My military service gives me experience. It doesn't make me incapable of being wrong. My books don't make me incapable of being wrong. My confidence doesn't make me incapable of being wrong. A person who refuses to accept that possibility isn't a thinker. He's a fan club with one member. The strongest arguments identify their limits. For example, I can explain why ordinary contrails may persist. That explanation doesn't prove that no government anywhere has ever conducted atmospheric testing. I can say Operation Popeye doesn't prove a current global program. That doesn't mean Operation Popeye is irrelevant. I can condemn the misuse of Agent Orange without claiming every detail of every exposure case is settled. I can criticize conspiracy reasoning without claiming governments deserve blind trust. I can say the evidence presented doesn't prove the allegation. That's different from claiming the allegation is impossible. Careful language isn't weakness. It's accuracy. People often demand absolute certainty from the official explanation while accepting almost no evidence from the alternative explanation. They say, the government hasn't answered every question, so the official account is false. Then they accept a theory that answers none of the logistical questions. Who operates the program? Unknown. What chemicals are used? Disputed. What's the purpose? Weather, depopulation, climate policy, food control, military testing, mind control, or all of them depending on the video. How's the program funded? Secretly. How's it administered? Compartmentalization. Where are the verified samples? Suppressed. Why has nobody produced conclusive operational evidence? Because everyone is threatened. That theory doesn't have fewer unanswered questions. It's replaced questions with excuses. Public discussion also requires people to distinguish accusations from questions. I wonder whether aircraft emissions affect weather is a question. I believe governments may be researching atmospheric manipulation is a suspicion. Here's a document describing a specific program as evidence of that program. They're spraying chemicals over us to control the population is an accusation. The stronger the statement, the stronger the evidence should be. That's how language works when adults are responsible for what they say. The internet rewards the opposite behavior. A cautious statement receives little attention. A dramatic statement spreads. I'm uncertain about the cause of this trail will not generate 50,000 views. They're poisoning your children and the media is hiding it will. Fear is profitable. Certainty is profitable. Outrage is profitable. Once somebody builds an audience around a theory, admitting uncertainty becomes financially and emotionally difficult. The theory becomes part of the person's identity. Evidence is no longer evaluated based on whether it's true. It's evaluated based on whether it protects the audience. That creates conspiracy entrepreneurs. They may not all be consciously dishonest. Some believe what they say. But the system rewards escalation. Yesterday, the claim was weather modification. Today, it's food control. Tomorrow, it'll be population tracking through rainfall. A theory must continue expanding to keep people engaged. Ordinary explanations can't compete with an enemy that controls every government, every corporation, every scientist, every aircraft, every election, and possibly the neighbor's lawn sprinkler. Citizens need better habits. When you encounter a claim, slow down. Separate observation from interpretation. Write down exactly what's alleged. Identify the people or institutions being accused. Ask what evidence supports each part. Check whether the source has direct knowledge. Look for documents. Look for physical evidence. Look for independent confirmation. Examine alternative explanations. Decide what evidence would disprove the claim. If no evidence could ever disprove it, you're dealing with faith, not investigation. Then apply the same standard to the official response. Don't assume the agency is correct. Don't assume the corporation is honest. Don't assume the scientist has no conflict. Don't assume the politician understands the issue. Ask for evidence there too. Consistency protects you from becoming somebody else's tool. Skepticism must face in both directions. I don't trust government because it calls itself government. I don't trust an online commenter because he calls himself awake. I don't trust a media outlet because it calls itself journalism. I don't trust a video because it contains ominous music and a photograph of a cloud. I examine the claim. I ask questions. I compare the evidence. Sometimes the answer remains uncertain. That's allowed. You're not required to replace every unanswered question with the first dramatic explanation that arrives. The phrase, "believe whatever you want," also reveals the problem. Facts don't change based on preference. You may believe whatever you want privately. Once you make a public accusation, Other people can examine it. They can reject it. They can ask for proof. They can expose weak reasoning. They can point out contradictions. That's not censorship. That's public discussion. Freedom of speech includes the freedom to tell someone their argument is poorly assembled. Here's the standard I recommend. Bring evidence. If you can't bring evidence, label the claim as suspicion. If you're repeating another person's statement, identify the source. If you don't know, say you don't know. If someone points out an error, correct it. If someone asks a valid question, answer it. If someone insults you, don't pretend the insult disproves your position. If you insult someone, don't pretend the insult proved yours. Insult isn't the argument. Opinion isn't evidence. Suspicion isn't proof. History isn't a blank check. And do your own research doesn't mean everybody else has to finish the work you abandoned. Dismantling the Republic is a blunt political critique, what Shawn Armstrong sees as America's descent into tribalism. This book takes aim at elite influence, fractured citizenship, border confusion, middle-class decline, and the weakening of the constitutional order. At the center of this book is a hard question. How does a republic come apart? Armstrong's answer is that elite political and cultural forces have pushed Americans away from shared citizenship and toward tribal thinking, mistrust, and fracture. Across 7 chapters, Armstrong tackles a string of linked problems: citizenship, middle-class instability, borders and sovereignty, tribal politics, unaccountable power, questions about the Constitution, and the pressure of globalism and the so-called Great Reset. The chapter material is pointed. Armstrong argues that citizenship has been diluted, the middle class has been weakened, identity politics has displaced civic unity, and unelected or unaccountable power has expanded where it shouldn't. The book is meant to provoke argument, not hide from it. This is for readers who want a direct political critique. If you care about citizenship, sovereignty, democracy, and whether America can still function as a republic instead of a patchwork of political tribes, this book is aimed right at you. Written by Shawn Armstrong, this book carries a plain spoken tone shaped by a working class background and a long military career. That mix gives the argument a grounded edge. It reads like somebody trying to say something clear, not somebody hiding behind fashionable language. If you want a short, direct political critique about tribalism, citizenship, and the future of the American Republic, get the book. Scan the QR code and pick up Dismantling the Republic on Amazon, written by Shawn Armstrong. Available now. Let's bring this entire discussion together. We began with aircraft trails. A person looked into the sky and saw something unusual. That observation became a claim about chemical spraying. The claim became weather manipulation. Weather manipulation became Operation Popeye. Operation Popeye became Agent Orange. Agent Orange became 9/11. 9/11 became Building 7. Building 7 became the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act became the erosion of freedom. The erosion of freedom became climate policy. Climate policy became the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum became food control. Food control became billionaires. And the billionaires became a new world order. At every stage, the emotional intensity increased. The evidence didn't. That's the problem. Government misconduct is real. Agent Orange was real. Vietnam veterans' suffering is real. Military weather modification was real. Classified programs are real. Political exploitation of emergencies is real. Surveillance abuse is real. Corporate influence is real. Bureaucratic dishonesty is real. None of that proves every claim made in their shadow. The existence of a real crime doesn't validate a false accusation. The existence of one secret program doesn't prove another. The existence of government lies doesn't make every government denial false. The existence of propaganda doesn't make every alternative source truthful. The existence of corruption doesn't mean incompetence disappears. Sometimes officials lie. Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they're confused. Sometimes they're protecting their careers. Sometimes the online critic is wrong. Sometimes the video is wrong. Sometimes the person asking questions has already decided that no answer will be accepted. We have to preserve distinctions. Contrails are not the same as cloud seeding. Cloud seeding is not the same as chemical warfare. Chemical warfare is not the same as agricultural pesticide use. A military research paper is not the same as an approved operation. A historical operation is not the same as a current operation. A public policy proposal is not the same as a secret global plan. A benefit obtained after a crisis is not proof that the beneficiary created the crisis. An unanswered question is not proof of the answer you prefer. These distinctions are the difference between investigation and storytelling. Agent Orange deserves respect because people suffered. Veterans suffered. Families suffered. My family suffered. That history should make us demand evidence, medical recognition, government accountability, and honest records. It shouldn't become a slogan attached to every argument involving the word chemical. Using veterans as emotional protection for an unsupported claim is not honoring them. It's using them. Popeye deserves serious historical study. It reminds us that military planners have treated weather as an instrument. It reminds us that governments classify programs. It reminds us that official denial should be examined. But the correct conclusion isn't, therefore, every trail is a covert operation. The correct conclusion is, because this happened before, new allegations should be investigated carefully. Carefully is the important word. Not automatically accepted, not automatically rejected. Investigated. The conspiracy escalator must also stop somewhere. You can't keep adding subjects until the size of the accusation becomes a substitute for evidence. A theory doesn't become stronger because it includes more villains. It becomes harder to prove. If your claim includes governments, militaries, airlines, scientists, corporations, international organizations, billionaires, farmers, media companies, and every person who disagrees with you, then you've created an accusation involving millions of people. You need more evidence, not less. Finally, public factual claims require proof. You're entitled to your opinion. You're entitled to suspicion. You're entitled to ask questions. You're entitled to criticize the government. You're entitled to distrust institutions. You're not entitled to have every accusation accepted without evidence. Nobody owes you your claim belief. Nobody has to complete your research. Nobody has to pretend they identifies a suspect. Nobody has to accept "wake up" as an answer. And nobody has to remain silent because you say you were talking to someone else in a public comment section. We need citizens capable of distrusting power without becoming addicted to paranoia. We need citizens capable of questioning government without surrendering judgment to every online personality. We need citizens capable of admitting uncertainty. We need citizens who understand that the burden of proof is not an establishment trick. It's one of the protections separating evidence from accusation. The government should be questioned aggressively. Politicians should be questioned. Corporations should be questioned. Scientists should be questioned. The military or the media should be questioned. Military leaders should be questioned. Activists should be questioned. Conspiracy promoters should be questioned. I should be questioned. You should be questioned. Nobody gets a free pass. If you have no ethical or evidentiary standard for your own side, you don't have a standard. You have a uniform. The next time someone tells you that aircraft are spraying chemicals, don't begin by insulting them. That comes later. Ask questions. What substance? What aircraft? What program? What agency? What equipment? What documents? What laboratory results? What chain of custody? What operational purpose? What evidence connects the historical program to the current accusation? Then listen. Maybe they have credible evidence. Examine it. Maybe they have a sincere observation. Respect it. Maybe they have questions. Discuss them. Maybe they have nothing but a collection of unrelated historical events and a villain called they. In that case, tell them plainly, government misconduct deserves investigation. Veterans deserve respect. History deserves accuracy. And accusations require proof. The government lied before. It will lie again. That's not an excuse to join it. Bring evidence. Bring documents. Bring verified samples. Bring names. Bring dates. Bring aircraft records. Bring operational details. But don't bring a century of government wrongdoing and try to use it as a forged passport for a claim that still can't identify the chemical in the sky. I'm Shawn Armstrong. This has been Shawn Thinking Out Loud. Think for yourself, question authority, and question the people who built careers telling you that questioning them proves you're asleep.